The peaceful routine. The Vanguard glided silently through the vast emptiness of space. Captain Jordan Steele stood at the helm, staring out at the endless stars. The ship was on a long journey, exploring a distant region of the galaxy that no human had ever visited before. The crew had been living in a quiet routine for the past few months. They spent their days studying planets, scanning the stars, and making small discoveries. There was nothing unusual about their mission. It was the kind of peaceful exploration humanity had hoped for when they first took to the stars. On the bridge, the crew moved around in their usual rhythm. Lieutenant Sarah Ward, the second in command, sat at her station, analyzing data from the ship's sensors. Ensign Miles Turner, the communications officer, was humming softly, occasionally sending out routine signals to nearby space stations. The rest of the crew carry out their tasks with a quiet efficiency, each person focused on their work. There were no alarms, no dangers, just the steady hum of the ship's engines and the quiet sounds of technology working as it should. Steele had always loved this peace. As a captain, he'd seen plenty of action in his earlier days. Battles, skirmishes, political tensions, he'd experienced it all. But now, all he wanted was calm. The vast emptiness of space was the perfect place for someone who needed a break from the chaos of the universe. He often found himself alone on the bridge at night, watching the stars and thinking about the past. Space was a reminder of how small humanity truly was, yet how far they had come. This mission was a chance for them to prove themselves again, but in a way that didn't involve war or conflict. It was exploration, discovery, and a hope for the future. But this morning was different. The calm of space was shattered by a sudden, sharp beep from the ship's communication system. Ensign Turner looked up from his station in surprise. "Captain," he said, his voice steady but laced with curiosity, "we've just received an unknown transmission. It's a distress signal, but the source is unknown." Steele turned toward the communications officer, narrowing his eyes. "Patch it through." The screen flickered briefly before an unfamiliar voice echoed through the bridge. The voice was cold, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. "Urgent alert. Hostile war vessel approaching." The words hung in the air for a moment. Steele felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard stories about the ruthless warships from the Empire, but he had never expected to face one firsthand. The Empire was a mysterious force, and many thought they were nothing more than a legend. Stories told to frighten children. But Steele knew better than to dismiss it as a mere tale. These warships were real, and they were known for their devastating firepower. "Where is it coming from?" Steele demanded, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. Turner quickly tapped at his controls, his fingers moving rapidly across the console. "According to the data, it's coming from the sector near Cormer. We're about 3 hours out." Captain Steele's heart rate increased as he tried to process the situation. The Vanguard was not equipped to face a warship of that size. Their ship was a science vessel, not designed for combat. It was fast and well-armed for research missions, but against a warship of the Empire's caliber, they stood little chance. "Get me a visual," Steele ordered. Turner's fingers flew over the controls again, and the main screen flickered. A blur of static appeared, followed by the silhouette of a massive ship. It was dark and menacing, like a shadow stretching across the stars. The shape was almost too large to comprehend. It seemed to consume space itself. Is that a warship?" Ward asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's worse than that," Steele muttered, his mind racing. He had read about these ships in the reports. Enormous war vessels capable of destroying entire fleets. Their weapon systems were devastating, and they had a reputation for never leaving survivors. The Empire was a powerful force, and their ships were the deadliest things in the galaxy. To encounter one was a nightmare, a death sentence for anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. "Captain," Ward said, breaking his thoughts, "what do we do?" Steele looked at her, his face grim. The crew was looking to him for direction. He had to make a decision, and fast. The peaceful routine they had enjoyed for so long was over. This was no longer an exploration mission. It was a fight for survival. He stood tall, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair as he gazed at the warship on the screen. The peaceful routine of space exploration was gone. In its place, a new reality had emerged, one where survival was uncertain, and the only option was to face the storm head-on. "Prepare for battle," Steele said, his voice firm. "We don't know what we're up against, but we'll fight with everything we have. All hands to your stations." The crew moved swiftly to their posts, their calmness replaced by the cold clarity of urgency. Steele watched them for a moment, a sense of pride filling him. They might be outmatched, but they were humans, and no one could ever count them out. The Vanguard was about to learn what it meant to face the might of an empire, and it would not go down without a fight. The unexpected warning. The atmosphere on the Vanguard had shifted from calm to tense in a matter of moments. Crew members moved quickly and efficiently, responding to the sudden shift in the mission. Steele stood at the center of the bridge, his mind racing as he tried to assess the situation. The warship was still a few hours away, but the fact that it was approaching so quickly sent waves of uncertainty through the crew. This wasn't a mere threat. It was an overwhelming force that could destroy them in an instant. Lieutenant Ward was the first to speak after Steele's order. "Captain, we need to analyze their weapon systems. If we're going to stand a chance, we need to know what we're dealing with." Her voice was steady, but the unease was palpable. Steele nodded, his mind already processing the data that Turner was bringing up on the screen. The communication officer was now fully focused, his fingers moving faster than ever across the console as he tried to make sense of the incoming signal. It wasn't just the size of the warship that was concerning. It was the speed at which it was traveling. The ship's sensors were picking up disturbing signals from the enemy vessel. "It's not just a warship," Turner said quietly, his voice almost lost among the rising tension. "They'd got advanced stealth technology. They'd been hiding in the shadows of a nearby asteroid field." "Stealth?" Ward asked, her brows furrowing. "We didn't see it on our initial scans. That means they could have been tracking us this whole time." "Precisely," Steele replied, his eyes narrowing. "We've been followed, and now they're closing in." The crew worked in silence for a moment, the only sounds being the soft hum of the ship's systems and the occasional beep from Turner's station as more data streamed in. Every passing second seemed heavier than the last. Steele tried to think of all the scenarios that could play out, but there was no good option. This wasn't the kind of battle they had trained for. Suddenly, the alert system blared again, cutting through the tension. A red light flashed across the bridge, signaling that the enemy warship had activated its weapon systems. The Vanguard was no longer the hunter, it was the prey. "Shields up," Steele commanded immediately. The order was followed swiftly by the crew, who activated the ship's energy shields. The ship was now as ready as it could be, but Steele knew their chances were slim. The Vanguard wasn't built for combat. It was designed for research and exploration, not fighting massive, heavily armed warships. "We're going to need every bit of luck we can get," Steele muttered under his breath, staring at the warship's growing silhouette on the screen. The massive enemy ship was closing in, its shape becoming clearer as it emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field. The size of it was staggering. This wasn't just any enemy ship. It was a ship built to end everything in its path. The ship's ominous presence filled the view screen. It was dark, sleek, and its sharp edges seemed to cut through the vacuum of space itself. The sensors showed that it was a full-sized battleship, armed with powerful energy cannons that could obliterate anything in its way. "Captain," Ward's voice broke through his thoughts, "the warship's weapon systems are charging. If they fire, our shields will only last a few seconds." Steele clenched his jaw. "We have to hold out. Buy us some time. We need to figure out how to turn this around." The crew's hands moved quickly across their consoles, trying to buy them any advantage they could. Turner was sending out signals, attempting to make contact with nearby ships, but there was no response. The enemy ship's interference was too strong, blocking any attempt to call for help. As the warship continued its approach, the crew's anxiety grew. It was clear now, this wasn't just a chance encounter. The Empire knew exactly where the Vanguard was. This was a planned attack, and they had no idea why. The only thing they knew for certain was that they were about to be caught in the middle of a fight they had no business being in. The Vanguard's engines hummed as the ship attempted to increase its speed, but the warship was far too fast. It was gaining on them, and soon they would be in range. Steele could see the enemy's weapon systems lighting up on the display, pulses of deadly energy being charged and ready for launch. Ward looked to Steele, her face tense. "Captain, we need a plan, and fast." Steele took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. His mind was racing, but he knew there was no time to waste. They couldn't outrun this enemy. They couldn't hide. The only thing left was to fight. We can't fight them head-on with our current systems, but we can try to outsmart them. Steele's voice was firm, and as he looked around at the crew, they could see that his resolve had hardened. Prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers, and get the weapons systems online. We may be outgunned, but I'll be damned if we don't give them a fight they won't forget. The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. Steele could feel their resolve in the air. They weren't ready for this fight, but they were ready to face it head-on. The Vanguard might not have been built for war, but its crew was ready to show the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. As the enemy warship loomed closer, Steele knew one thing for certain. The battle for survival was about to begin. The decision to fight. The tension in the air was palpable. The Vanguard was outmatched in every way, but Captain Steele knew that the only option was to face the enemy head-on. There was no place to run, no escape. The warship was closing in, and soon their shields would be tested in ways they had never imagined. It was time to act. "Lieutenant Ward," Steele began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty, "I need you to analyze their weaponry one more time. We have to know exactly what we're up against if we stand any chance." Ward nodded, her fingers dancing over the console. "Understood, Captain. I'm scanning their weapon systems now." The information began to flow into the ship's system. The readings were grim. The enemy warship's primary weapon was a massive energy cannon, capable of cutting through even the toughest shields. The secondary weapons included a series of smaller, but still powerful, railguns that could pepper the Vanguard with rapid-fire blasts. "Captain," Ward said, her voice laced with concern, "their primary cannon is already charged and ready. It will take us out in a single hit if we don't do something. Their secondary weapons will be just as dangerous." Steele's mind raced as he took in the data. They couldn't survive a direct hit from the main cannon, and the smaller weapons would pick away at the Vanguard's shields before they had a chance to do any real damage to the enemy ship. The Vanguard's only advantage was speed, and it was time to use that to their benefit. "We'll need to outmaneuver them," Steele said, turning to his crew. "We can't go head-to-head with their firepower. But if we stay on the move, we might be able to slip past their main gun long enough to retaliate." Ward raised an eyebrow. "A risky plan, but it's our only shot. I'll have the evasive maneuvers ready." "Ensign Turner," Steele continued, his voice firm, "prepare all comm channels for emergency broadcasts. If we get a chance to send out a distress signal, we'll need to do it fast. And if we have any hope of getting reinforcements, we need to keep those channels open." Turner nodded, his face tense. "I'm ready, Captain." Steele took a moment to survey the bridge. His crew was ready. They were scared, yes, but there was determination in their eyes. He could see it in their faces. Just like him, they knew that running wasn't an option. This was it. This was the fight. "All hands, brace yourselves," Steele ordered, his voice steady. "We're going to face this head-on, and we're going to survive. No matter what happens, we fight as one." The crew snapped into action. their movements precise as they activated the ship's systems. Steele watched the view screen as the enemy warship grew ever closer. The massive ship's dark silhouette loomed ahead, ready to strike. But Steele wasn't going to wait for that strike. He wasn't going to sit back and let them decide the fate of his crew. "Lieutenant," Steele said, turning toward Ward, "get ready to execute evasive maneuvers. We're going to fly straight into the asteroid field. If we can use the debris to block their line of fire, we might stand a chance." Ward's eyes widened for a moment, but then a determined look crossed her face. "Understood, Captain. I'm preparing the course now." Steele stood tall, watching the growing warship. He could hear the faint hum of the engines powering up as the crew worked to execute their plan. The next few minutes would decide their fate. As the enemy ship's weapon systems powered up again, Steele felt the weight of the moment. The Vanguard was far from a warship. It was designed for exploration, not combat. But in the face of a ruthless enemy, they would have to become something else, a ship willing to fight for survival, no matter the odds. "Ensign Turner, open a channel to the entire crew," Steele ordered. Turner's hands flew across the console. A moment later, Steele's voice echoed throughout the entire ship. "Crew of the Vanguard, this is Captain Steele. We are facing an enemy unlike any we've encountered before. We're outgunned and outnumbered, but we are not helpless. We are humans, and we will not go down without a fight. Whatever happens, remember, we stand together. We fight as one. Stay strong, and we will survive." As his words echoed across the ship, Steele knew that this was more than just a battle for survival. This was a chance to prove humanity's resilience. They had fought for every inch of space they had claimed, and now they would fight for their lives. "Lieutenant, make the jump," Steele commanded. Ward pushed a final set of buttons, and the ship lurched into motion. The Vanguard shot forward, racing toward the asteroid field with incredible speed. Behind them, the enemy warship followed, its powerful engines roaring as it pursued them with deadly intent. The battle was about to begin, and Steele was determined that they would not go down without making the Empire regret ever setting their sights on humanity. The first shots rang out, a burst of energy flashing across the void of space. It was a warning shot, but Steele knew that the next would not be a warning. It would be a kill shot. The Vanguard swerved sharply, weaving through the asteroid field as Steele's voice rang out, directing his crew through every evasive maneuver. The warship was close behind, its weapons charging again, but Steele had no intention of waiting to be struck. They were going to fight, and they were going to make sure the enemy knew that humanity would never go down without a fight. The countdown to impact. The Vanguard tore through the asteroid field, weaving and dodging in every direction. The ship shook violently as debris from the field ricocheted off its shields, but Steele wasn't concerned with the minor damage. The real threat was the warship closing in behind them, its engines burning brightly against the darkness of space. The crew's eyes were glued to their stations, focused on the task at hand, as they raced against time itself. "Shields holding steady, Captain," Ward called out, her voice focused and determined. "But we can't keep dodging forever. We need a plan to fight back." Steele's jaw clenched. They couldn't keep running. Eventually, the enemy would corner them. But in the heat of the moment, Steele also knew one thing. They had to stay alive long enough to find a way to hit back. The warship's powerful weapons systems could wipe them out in seconds, but if they could stay ahead long enough, they might find a weakness. He watched the view screen as their ship ducked behind a massive asteroid, barely avoiding a pulse of energy from the warship's main cannon. The blast missed them by inches, sending a shockwave through the ship that rattled everyone inside. It was a reminder of how much danger they were truly in. "We can't afford another hit like that," Steele muttered under his breath. "Turner, any response from the comms? Can we get a distress signal out?" Turner's fingers flew across his console, his face lit by the flashing lights. "I'm still trying, Captain, but the enemy's interference is jamming our signals. There's no way to send anything out. If we want help, we're going to have to win this on our own. Steele's mind raced. They were cut off from any outside help. Their only hope now was to outsmart the warship and buy enough time to launch a counterattack. He looked out the view screen, taking a deep breath as the silhouette of the enemy warship loomed closer. It was massive, a behemoth of technology and destruction, designed to crush anything in its path. The crew of the Vanguard had no illusions about their chances, but they weren't ready to give up. "Lieutenant, can we use the asteroid field to our advantage?" Steele asked. Ward didn't hesitate. "Yes, Captain. If we can time it right, we can use the field to block their line of fire. Their targeting systems won't be able to lock on if we're constantly moving behind large obstacles." "Do it," Steele ordered. "Stay on the move. Don't let them line us up for another shot." The Vanguard twisted and turned, weaving through the asteroids with incredible agility. The warship behind them followed, but it was slower, unable to maneuver as quickly as the Vanguard. Steele knew that if they could keep up this speed and make the right moves, they could tire the enemy out, forcing them to make a mistake. Every second that passed was another chance to turn the tide in their favor. "Captain," Ward said, her voice tense, "they're locking onto us. The next shot is coming in fast. We won't be able to dodge it in time." Steele's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment where they would either survive or face their doom. He had to think quickly. His mind raced through the options, trying to come up with something, anything, that could give them a fighting chance. "Turner, is there any way we can disrupt their targeting systems?" Steele asked, his mind still working through the possibilities. Turner paused, then replied with a spark of hope. "We might be able to. There's a weapon in the ship's arsenal, an old EMP pulse generator. It's meant for disabling electronics, but it's never been tested in combat. We could try it to disrupt their targeting, at least for a moment." Steele's eyes widened. "If we can disrupt their targeting systems, that might give us a window to strike back." "Do it, Turner. Fire the EMP pulse." Turner nodded quickly and tapped a few buttons. A low hum filled the air, and for a brief moment the lights flickered. Then a crackling pulse shot out from the Vanguard, heading straight toward the warship. Steele could only hope it would be enough. The enemy warship paused for a split second as the pulse hit, and then the ship began to stagger, as if its systems were temporarily offline. A powerful energy weapon that had been charging suddenly faltered, and the targeting lock that had been on the Vanguard blinked out. Steele's heart surged with a new sense of hope. The EMP pulse had worked. They had bought themselves a precious few seconds of safety. "Now's our chance," Steele shouted. "Ward, full speed ahead. Let's get some distance and regroup." The Vanguard surged forward, pulling away from the enemy warship. The crew's hands were steady, their resolve stronger than ever. The warship had just been temporarily blinded, and now the Vanguard had a brief window of opportunity. But Steele knew this wasn't over. Not yet. "We've bought ourselves some time," Steele said, his voice low and intense. "But we need to be ready. They won't stay down forever." As the Vanguard continued its evasive maneuvers, Steele's mind was already working on the next step. The warship would recover quickly, and when it did, they would have to be ready. But for now, they had a small victory, a victory that gave them a fighting chance. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back now. The first strike. The Vanguard was still moving fast, weaving through the asteroid field with agility that even the most seasoned pilots would admire. But despite their best efforts, the enemy warship was regaining its senses. Steele knew that the brief window of opportunity wouldn't last forever. The Vanguard was lighter and faster, but it couldn't outrun the warship forever. The question now was, what could they do in the moments they had before the warship's weapons came online again? "Captain," Ward said, her voice sharp, "the warship's targeting systems are coming back online. They're locking onto us again, and the main cannon is charging." Steele clenched his fists. The Vanguard's shields were still holding, but not for long. They had to act, and they had to act now. "Ensign Turner," Steele called. "Can you get a signal through to nearby ships? Anyone? We need help, and we need it fast." Turner's fingers flew across the console, his face lit by the pale blue glow of the communication system. "Still no response, Captain. The enemy's jamming is too strong." "Damn it," Steele muttered. "All right then. We have to do this on our own. Ward, prepare to execute evasive maneuvers. I'll take command of the weapon systems." Ward looked up with a determined expression. "Ready when you are, Captain." Steele turned his focus to the weapon systems. The Vanguard wasn't equipped for a battle like this, but it did have its fair share of firepower. Its laser turrets were small, but precise, and with the enemy warship closing in, Steele wasn't going to hold back. If they had any chance of surviving, it was going to be by using everything they had. "Initiating weapons systems," Steele said, tapping commands into the console. The sound of the weapons coming online was a cold reminder of how serious this situation had become. The warship's massive energy cannon was charging again, and Steele could feel the pressure building. He didn't have much time. A few more seconds, and the Vanguard would be in its line of fire. They needed to strike first. "Fire the lasers," Steele shouted. The Vanguard's turrets fired with pinpoint accuracy, sending a stream of energy bolts toward the enemy warship. The blasts hit the warship's shields, causing sparks and flashes, but the damage was minimal. Steele knew that the Vanguard's firepower wasn't going to be enough to bring down the warship, but every hit counted. The more damage they did, the more likely it was that the warship's commander would hesitate. Hesitation meant a chance. But the warship wasn't hesitating. Instead, the massive ship continued its approach, and Steele could see the bright, threatening glow of its energy cannon charging up for the final strike. "Shields at 50%, Captain," Ward called out, her voice tight with strain. "We can't take another hit like that." Steele's mind raced. If they took another shot from the main cannon, the Vanguard would be crippled. It would be a matter of moments before the warship finished them off. He had to make a decision. They had one shot, one chance to turn the tide. "Turner," Steele said quickly, "can you reverse the polarity of the shield generator? It might deflect the shot just enough to give us an edge." "I can try, Captain," Turner said, already working on the console. "It's a long shot, but I'll do what I can." "Good. Ward, get ready to execute a full throttle burn. We need to hit them where it hurts." "On it," Ward replied. The Vanguard surged forward once again, narrowly dodging a series of smaller projectiles fired from the warship's secondary weapons. But the main cannon was still charging, its energy growing more intense by the second. "Captain, they're about to fire," Ward warned. Steele's heart pounded in his chest. The warship's cannon fired, and a blinding beam of energy shot forward, aiming straight for the Vanguard. Steele braced himself, knowing there was no way to dodge it. But just as the beam was about to make contact, Turner's quick thinking paid off. A pulse of energy surged through the shields, and the shot from the enemy warship deflected off the Vanguard's shields, creating a shockwave that rattled the entire ship. The shields held for a moment longer, but Steele knew they couldn't take another hit like that. "Now," Steele shouted. Ward immediately throttled up, sending the Vanguard into a high-speed spin, making it nearly impossible for the enemy ship to get a clear shot. The warship fired once more, but the Vanguard was already in motion, and the shot missed by a wide margin. "We're free," Ward shouted, her voice filled with a rush of adrenaline. They missed. For the first time since the battle began, Steele allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but he knew this wasn't over. The enemy warship was relentless, and they had to do more than just dodge. They needed to counterattack. Fast. "Target their weak points," Steele commanded. "Fire the lasers again and focus on their engines. If we can disable their propulsion, we might have a chance to make a run for it." The Vanguard's turrets fired again, sending another round of blasts toward the enemy ship. This time, They aimed directly for the warship's engine ports. Sparks erupted from the enemy ship as the blasts found their mark. Direct hit. We've damaged their engines, Ward called out. They're slowing down. Steele's heart raced with hope. Keep the pressure on them. We can't let up now. The warship continued to fire back, but now it was slower, its movements more sluggish. The Vanguard had given itself an opening. Steele knew this was their chance. With the enemy warship struggling to maintain speed, the Vanguard could maneuver around it and land a decisive blow. All hands, brace for impact, Steele said, his voice cold with resolve. This fight is far from over, but we're not giving up. The battle was far from decided, but for the first time, Steele felt like they had a fighting chance. They had landed their first strike. Now, it was time to finish what they had started. The last stand. The Vanguard moved with newfound purpose. Steele could see the enemy warship slowing down, its once unstoppable momentum reduced to a crawl. The damage they had inflicted was starting to take its toll. The crew was breathing more easily, but Steele knew better than to relax. This was far from over. If they were going to survive, they had to land one final decisive blow. Ward, keep us on their tail, Steele commanded, his voice unwavering. We have to stay ahead of them just long enough to finish what we started. Turner, is there any way to get a distress signal out now? Turner's fingers danced across the console, but his expression remained grim. The enemy's jamming is still too strong, Captain. We're cut off from any outside help. Steele's gaze turned toward the massive warship behind them. It was staggering how quickly it had adapted to their evasive tactics. The enemy was still firing, but each shot seemed to miss by a hair's breadth. They were closing the gap, their firepower just as dangerous as ever. Damn it, Steele muttered. We can't keep dodging forever. We need to neutralize them before they recover fully. Ward's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Captain, I've identified a weak spot in their hull. It's a small gap near their main power core. If we hit it, we could disable their entire propulsion system and disable their ability to fire back. Steele's eyes locked onto Ward. This was it. If they could land that hit, they might have a real chance of ending this fight. But they had one shot. They couldn't afford to miss. Lock in on that weak spot, and let's hit them with everything we've got, Steele ordered. Turner, make sure the weapon systems are fully charged. This is our one chance to finish this. The crew moved quickly, their training kicking in as the Vanguard glided toward the warship, which was still struggling to regain full control of its engines. The energy cannon that had been their primary threat was quiet now, but the warship wasn't out of the fight yet. As the Vanguard closed in on the warship, Steele's heart raced. The final moments of the battle were upon them. They couldn't afford any hesitation. He stared at the view screen, watching as the tiny gap in the enemy's hull grew closer and closer. Target locked, Ward announced. Ready to fire on your command, Captain. Steele's hand hovered over the firing controls. His crew was waiting for him. This was their moment. Everything they had been through, the uncertainty, the fear, the near-death encounters, had led them here. This one shot could be the difference between life and death, and Steele wasn't about to let them lose. Fire, Steele shouted. The Vanguard's weapon systems released a full barrage of concentrated fire. The lasers shot out with unerring precision, slamming into the weak spot on the warship's hull. Sparks and debris flew as the shots tore through the armor, reaching the core beneath. For a split second, the universe seemed to hold its breath. The Vanguard and the warship stood in perfect stillness, the hum of the ship's engines and the distant rumble of the explosion, the only sounds breaking the silence. Then the explosion came. A massive burst of energy erupted from the enemy warship, sending shockwaves through space. The warship's engines flared out of control, and the ship began to drift, its once unstoppable momentum grinding to a halt. Direct hit, Ward shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. They're going down, their powers failing. Steele felt a surge of victory wash over him, but he knew better than to celebrate yet. The enemy warship wasn't completely destroyed. It was disabled, crippled, but still alive. The crew needed to stay alert, in case the warship had any last tricks up its sleeve. "Captain," Turner said, his voice shaking with excitement, "I'm detecting a full power loss on their ship. It's no longer firing back. They're done." Steele let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The warship, once an unstoppable force of destruction, was now nothing more than a hulk drifting helplessly through space. The Vanguard had won. Against all odds, they had survived. "Let's not waste time," Steele said, his voice steady once again. "We've got no way of knowing how long before they recover. Prepare to disengage and make a full retreat. We'll give them one final wide berth before we make sure this sector is clear." As the crew began to set the ship in motion, Steele looked out at the wreckage of the enemy warship on the view screen. It was an incredible sight. Their hardest battle won, not through superior strength, but through resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer willpower. They had done it. Against all odds, they had faced an overwhelming force and come out on top. The Vanguard had survived. Humanity had survived. And the universe would never forget the day the Vanguard stood tall against an empire's wrath. "All hands, you did it," Steele said into the comms, his voice filled with pride. "We've made it through. You've proven that humanity can face even the greatest threats and emerge victorious. We are survivors, and we always will be." The crew of the Vanguard could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. They had won the day. But Steele knew that this victory, as sweet as it was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more threats. But as long as they fought together, humanity would never back down. And the Vanguard would always be ready to face whatever came next.